You could have a very large increase in the number of destructive drones. Potentially have the ability to be built in secret as well. Having enough kind of mosquito-sized drones that could each individually be deadly. Having 8 billion of them would fit in 5 shipping containers. So it's actually remarkably small relative to the people who are very worried about AI. I'm still on the more optimistic end, 1 to 10%. That's optimistic nowadays. Yeah. I take really quite seriously the idea of human-level artificial intelligence, even in the next 3-5 years. Take even much more seriously an intelligence explosion, so very, very rapid increase in AI capabilities. We also have an incredibly fast-paced scaling of compute, trends in algorithmic efficiency. The next 5 years in particular, we're going to make an unusually large amount of progress towards AGI compared to any other decade, simply because we're scaling the investment so much. There's this very concrete argument in which the next 5-10 years really are a special time, because it's a time when we're going from AI being this tiny, tiny fraction of the overall economy to being quite a large fraction, and that's a one-time change. People have really not woken up. The leading AI labs are among the very, very most important organizations in the world that will ever exist. So this paper is AI will drive at least a century's worth of technological development in just a decade. What would you expect the world to look like in 2125? And then imagine all of those changes happening over the course of just a decade. So imagine if in 1925, we'd gotten a century's worth of tech progress in 10 years. And so we should think about all the things that happened between 1925 and 2025. Satellites, biological and chemical weapons, the atomic bomb, the hydrogen bomb, the scale-up of those nuclear stockpiles, game theory, social science, computers, the internet, decolonization, second and third wave feminism. So all of these things are happening over the course of 10 years. Human decision-making and human institutions don't speed up, though. So this thought experiment is to try and really get a sense of just the sheer amount of change. People don't know this is coming. The world would be acting very differently if it was taking seriously the idea of an intelligence explosion. And I expect it to be too fast. And actually, I do recommend kind of slowing the intelligence explosion. The progress studies folks, they're gunning for rates of economic growth on the order of like 5% per year, because that would just be so much better than what we've had recently, which has been generally much slower. They're not gunning for rates of economic growth that are like 50% or 100%. And so I actually think if you ask those people, well, what would be the optimal pace? Maybe they would say 10% per year. But when you're going kind of radically faster than that again, then you've just got this challenge of enormous amounts to deal with and just not enough time to kind of think things through. Algorithmic efficiency is increasing so fast at the moment as well. There's efficiency improvements in pre-training and post-training. Putting them together, you get something like a 10-fold improvement. Compare that to the 5%. We have models that are doing pretty well on benchmarks for machine learning research, which is the crucial ability. So it really looks like the beginning of the next stage when AI can in fact automate AI R&D. That is in sight. Once you get to the point where AI labor is most of the labor going towards research and development, then quite quickly, it's the growth rate of the AI labor that's driving the growth rate of the overall effective research effort that we're putting into R&D. Why are we making scientific technological progress at the moment? Well, we're trying to do so. We're putting researchers and physical capital towards the task. A research effort is growing by 5% per year. At some point, AI will be able to do almost all the jobs that a research scientist can do. But then it will keep progressing past that point. Even if you don't think that AI will surpass human intelligence, it's just that we'll have more labor. And actually, even if you also assume that you don't get this recursive improvement dynamics, where AI starts designing better AI, which designs better AI, and so on. And even if you think that the current trends that are driving AI getting better slow down dramatically, even with all of that, the growth rate in effective computation would be much more than 10 times the growth rate of today. But in fact, I think we will have this recursive improvement, and that will speed things up even more. Where the first is a software feedback loop. AI systems get really good at designing better algorithms. They make better algorithms, means you can make even better AI. That helps you make even better algorithms and so on. Second is chip quality or technological feedback loop. AI gets really good at chip design, where you get more computational power per dollar. And then the third is the industrial explosion and the chip production feedback loop. Rather than needing human labor, instead you now have AIs controlling robots, such that you can have wholly autonomous factories producing goods. The more computational power you have, the more AIs you have, the higher quality AIs you have. once you have wholly autonomous industry, AI and robots just doing everything. That's like really strong in my view, because you've got this factory, it's producing goods. Now, how many goods do you have if you have 2 factories? Well, it's like, well, it seems like twice as many. But if one of the things that those factories are producing are AIs that are helping to improve the efficiency, like making it just a little bit more efficient on top of the doubling you get just from replicating the factories, then you'll have accelerating growth. Why pay more attention to the industrial explosion? So one is just, it's more likely. So it totally might be the case that you don't get the software, but you do get the industrial. Second, human civilization could increase 1,000-fold in its energy capture just on Earth. If you're willing to think about space-based energy capture as well, then you can increase that by 1 billion-fold. So yeah, the plateau is very, very high, and then the rates of growth might be very fast indeed. We have an existence proof of extremely fast-growing biological machines, namely fruit flies. They double in biomass within a week. Can we produce something that grows as quickly as fruit flies do? And then secondly, would we hit that before we've gone through the resource overhang that civilization currently has? Both of those things seem reasonably plausible to me. The industrial explosion gives authoritarian countries an advantage that they might not otherwise have. Authoritarian countries can have a higher savings rate. Got these 2 factories, they produce more than twice as much output. You only get this acceleration if you're reinvesting those outputs, building even more factories. And historically, authoritarian countries have been able to do exactly that. Environmental regulation in particular kind of really slows down industry. Again, if you're an authoritarian country, snap your fingers and it goes away. Already today, it is very clear that China would have an enormous advantage over the United States in terms of very rapidly building out industry. And I think we should be taking it seriously and preparing. There will be incentives to invest in military technology once you've built up automated militaries. If I can have a successful cyber attack against your automated army, then not only do I get to destroy your army, I get to control it too. There could be just quantitative changes, so massive increase in the number of nuclear weapons. We went from having none to having 40,000 at peak in the 70s and 80s. Well, if the economy is suddenly 100 times bigger, perhaps that could increase much more again. But nuclear weapons are regarded as defense dominant because if we're 2 rival countries and I attack you with my nuclear weapons, well, you can retaliate. We both get wiped out. With future technology, if I had really good missile defense, I could annihilate you essentially, while knowing that I would not face any repercussions myself. That would give me very strong incentive to annihilate you before you get that technology. Nanotechnology, artificial viruses, it's very easy to release a bioweapon and really quite hard to defend against it. That is absolutely one of the top risks there. If you do have an authoritarian country and you've got AI, you can make your whole workforce loyal to you. You can make your whole military, your whole police force. Democratic countries becoming non-democratic because of a military coup where AI could lead to intense concentration of power, an incredible ability for small groups to entrench power. Once you've got most power in the hands of a small number of people, that just poses major risk of lock-in because the people in power at that time will want to maintain their power. The key thing, when we talk about lock-in, it's indefinite. So there have been many, many attempts to lock in values and institutions in history. A relatively small group in the late 18th century decide how the country is going to be governed, make it extremely hard to change that. And that's still guiding the American political system in a very significant way. It's quite plausible to me the US wins the race to AGI, becomes such a large part of the economy that it's a de facto world government, and that guides just how the very long-term future goes. In which case it was Madison and Hamilton were in fact locking things in a really indefinite way. With AGI, we can have very specific sets of goals encoded in the AGI. We can have many backups. We can use error correction so that the code that specifies those goals don't change over time. And so we could have a constitution that is enshrined in the AGI, and that just persists indefinitely. We're also just literally creating and designing most of the beings that will exist in the world, and we get to choose what their values are. One generation can say, okay, well, they've all got to abide by this liberal democratic constitution, or they've the principles of the Chinese Communist Party. If AI does take over, there's still this huge range of possible outcomes. One where it kills everybody, second where it disempowers humanity but doesn't kill everybody and in fact leaves perhaps humanity with a lot of resources and we are all personally much better off than we were, it's just that we're no longer in control of the future. Or perhaps it tortures all of humanity because it really, maybe it's even a sadist, uses us all in experiments. Or goes and does something just really good. A moral kind of reasoner that itself figures out what's correct, judges that humanity was on the wrong track and does it all. It's still misaligned, it still takes over, it's still bad. It's not the outcome we want. But there's this huge range of possible outcomes, even conditional on AI takeover. ensure that whatever project builds AGI is well governed. There's a pretty plausible argument that that company, that project, could end up as a de facto world government. De facto rather than de jure, because it's not like anyone voted them in, but de facto because they would just have enormous amount of AI labor. In this scenario, it's like extremely super intelligent, gives a decisive strategic advantage, and they would get to choose how that AI is aligned. So that could be a really pivotal moment. No matter how much we try and distribute power, a bunch of people are going to have a lot of power at a very crucial point in time. They're going to be making consequential decisions. I want those people to be humble and cooperative. Machine learning researchers, they currently have an enormous amount of power that they will predictably lose. So there's actually this amazing confluence of self-interest among them. You could imagine this kind of union of concerned computer scientists, a group saying like, look, we will only build this thing that will replace us under XYZ conditions. We will be creating many artificial intelligences with capabilities greater than that of human beings. We really don't know what grounds consciousness, what grounds moral status. My view is that they're very likely to be beings with moral status. What sort of rights should they have? Perhaps there could be policies so that if an AI asks to be turned off, then you grant it that. By default, you will get all of the surplus they generate because you own it, like any other piece of software. A different way of thinking about it, if they do genuinely have moral status, is that they own themselves. They can sell their labor and they get a profit from that. More extreme again is political rights. So can they stand for office? We talked about Claude for president. It interacts quite closely with takeover risk, because in particular, I think we should be training AIs to be risk averse. Human beings are extraordinarily risk averse. Ask most people, would you flip a coin? 50% chance you die, 50% chance you have the best possible life for as long as you possibly would, as many resources as you want. I think almost no one would flip the coin. AIs should be trained to be at least as risk averse as that. On balance, though, I think we'll give AIs too little in the way of rights. Future generations would look back on this transition period as something with like real moral regret, because it may well involve treating beings with moral status really quite badly. Certainly when it looks the same as a human being and acts in much the same way. Intuitively, it's just very clear that you empathize with it, and very good chance it has moral status at least. Companies, they lose the whole business model if what they're producing are people. Not software. So there'll be interestingly two different pressures. One is to make AIs that are very relatable, AIs that can be friends, can be romantic partners, even AIs that can imitate dead loved ones, or also influencers as well. This is already happening. Influencers can now talk to thousands, millions of fans via their chatbot. So there'll be this interesting pressure on one hand to make extremely human-like models, yet at the same time, when asked, for them to say, oh no, I'm not conscious, I'm just an AI model. You should really pause and reflect on the fact that many companies now are saying what we want to do is build AGI, AI that is as good as humans. And it's like, okay, what does a good society look like when we have humans and we have trillions of AI beings going around? How do we coexist like in an ethical and morally respectable way? And it's like, there's nothing. I think the one that's most common is you've just got humans in control of everything and there's AI servants. As soon as you think, well, maybe, and quite probably, those beings have moral status, that no longer looks like an attractive vision. The worry is not that people won't know what to do, it's that they won't care. Take animal welfare today. There's a lot of information that is publicly available. They could quite trivially find out, and people deliberately choose not to. And so similarly, in the future, whatever the facts, people won't care. Once you've got AGI, it's just much easier to do things in space, to have industry. Because at the moment, if you want to have something happen in space, you've got to send human beings who are extraordinarily poorly adapted for living in space. AI, however, you don't. It could just go and operate autonomously. You've got the automated factories, so you have industry that can self-replicate. So you can just start growing your industrial base really quite quickly. Again, imagine we're talking about the world in 2200, and it's just that we're saying that we're getting that world in 10 years. I think there are two ways in which space becomes very important. One is as a risk for concentration of power. On Earth, the main overhang of resources, surface area of the oceans, in particular the high seas, which are currently unclaimed. You could have floating solar farms that power data centers there. That is like most energy hitting the Earth. But much larger gain, potential for solar farms around the sun, just sheer energy that you can claim from the sun, 2 billion-fold greater. You can imagine this country has got this temporary lead. It is then able to build industrial base around the sun. It has turned that temporary advantage into a permanent advantage. One of the reasons I'm worried about this, it allows one country to get a decisive advantage over another without ever making any of the other countries worse off than they have been, without ever using violence. Economic power distribution gets locked in and forever because you've now used all the resources that are available. I do think that the best solution to many of the challenges involves leveraging AI to help solve the problem. So there's this super alignment plan, which I think should be like the baseline plan for alignment, is that you have human-ish level AI. Maybe it's even dumber than human, but it's a lot of them or something, such that you can get loads of useful alignment work out of it, helps you align the smarter models, and especially at the early stages of an intelligence explosion. So you could also try and invest in AI education and training for decision makers. I expect there to be tons of work for telling a CEO or president, like, here's what to understand. So back in the early days, there was discussion of oracles versus agents. Oracles just like tell you facts about the world and help you reason, are very smart. The cutting edge of AI was not like that at all. They were agents. AlphaStar, for example, they were really good at computer games. And now it's swung totally the other way, where primarily the AIs are just extremely good at helping you understand things. What I would want, ideally, is for the people in political power, they wake up, they get this perfectly optimized brief of everything that's happened while they were asleep, which was probably a lot. We need that product to exist. We also need political decision makers to have familiarity with it in advance. Just the current models could transform education.
Yeah.
One of the ideas I've had is AI career coach, productivity coach, life coach, health coach. Just huge potential intrinsic benefits. Like people get a lot of benefits from such sort of coaching. Deal-making AI is another one. Because if I have an AI representative, can talk to your AI representative, discuss like all of the possible kind of trades we could make, that's like insane amounts of economic value, but could also be extraordinarily useful for navigating rapid technological development, because it could help enable agreements across countries too. So the US could have their delegate of AI representatives. China could have their delegate of AI representatives. You could just have way more labor going into diplomacy, trying to find deals. It's really very far away that we get to human-level scientist AI. There's still kind of human bottlenecks, and that really slows things down. So that would be technological bottleneck. The second could just be social. I don't think the world as a whole wants things to accelerate as fast as they are. They might be deliberate efforts to slow things. He Zhenghui in China produced 2 twins he had genetically engineered to be resistant to HIV. Global outcry. If were it not for that, probably China would be fine with doing genetic engineering on humans. So instead, he goes to jail. It's moratorium on it. We could have cloned humans for quite some time now. We've decided not to do it. Similarly, responses to COVID, there weren't human challenge trials anywhere in the world. So we don't have a global government, but we do kind of have a global culture.
Yeah.
That, in my view, is like the strongest argument for thinking there would be a slowdown. People don't want to lose their jobs. That's a source of meaning and social status for them. People are generally just really quite cautious about technology. If things are kind of spread out, then you could have AI making people really quite a lot richer even than they are today. And that makes people even more cautious. The last few centuries have resulted in this enormous material abundance. How well have we done at turning that material abundance into good outcomes? And I say we've done very badly. And that's for a couple of reasons. Global inequality, spending a lot of resources in ways that don't really improve people's well-being very much at all. People spend loads on consumer goods that don't really benefit them. So I think there's a lot of squandering in terms of like upside. But then the bigger thing is the introduction of bads as well, where just one moral error, which is namely how society treats non-human animals, tens of billions of animals that are killed in factory farms, living lives of terrible suffering. Either way, it at least undoes most of that good. So in fact, the world today is achieving really a small fraction of the value it could have been achieving. And so the same thing might happen in the future. Even if it's easy to get the upside, you've got an Earth, flourishing beings who are all free and able to do what they want. You also need to make sure you don't have bads too. I could tell you a story of this amazing utopian future, but just has one flaw. It's founded on the suffering of like a single child. I think that common sense, you lose a lot of value. There are definite causes for optimism. The fact that we're getting these reasoning models means we're just going to be like a lot wiser than we could be at the point of developing highly agentic AIs. Now, the fact that we've got this like new paradigm of putting a lot of compute into inference, great news, because it means that the transition from subhuman to AGI and superintelligence will be more gradual. The fact that the models currently are reasoning out loud using human language has the potential to be very helpful from a safety perspective as well. I think the fact that we will get amazing AI assistants, that is really good. The 2 things that we can do this century is reduce the chance of extinction. We can decrease the chance of lock-in, so increase the chance of open future and decrease the chance of everything else. Simply getting people to understand what is coming, simply explaining what's happening now is already a huge advance. So short piece of content on the latest AI news. There could be a lot more of that.